Last night I'm watching Memphis put it on Milwaukee. They out-rebound them 56-39. Milwaukee, that doesn't give a lot of transition points, just getting worked in transition. This is all Memphis without Bane, who the update last week is he's out another 3-4 weeks. I realized Drew Holiday wasn't there for Milwaukee. I'm always a little hesitant on the passing of the torch thing. Like Simmons and I were talking about New Orleans, where he's like, are they a contender? Are they a fringe contender? And I'm like, until I've seen, like when I've seen none of your guys ever in a playoff series, it's hard for me to buy all the way in. Memphis has more playoff to them than this group of New Orleans Pelicans. But what Memphis is doing in December, 7-0, number 2 on offense, number 1 on defense. The point differential is absurd this month. Mm-hmm. It's starting to feel like with Phoenix and now the Curry injury and everything else, like again, it's still December, but we may be in the midst of the passing of the torch coming out west, but we're just not sure who that team is.
Yeah, I mean, if you're like in the Western Conference, like one of the interesting things that's going on is like no matter what's happening with your team, there's so much trauma everywhere else that you're kind of okay. Like the Lakers just had this really rough loss to the Celtics, like completely blew a game they should have won. But like in the last couple of days, like Lakers have gotten good news. Like, you know, not that you want to celebrate an injury, but like Steph getting hurt helps the Lakers. You know, it's like, wait a minute. You mean the Warriors might actually be down here fighting with us? Might be a team we can, you know, heck, if Steph's out a month, Lakers might pass them. I mean, I don't know what'll happen. You know, the Warriors have 4 more games on this road trip. Are we giving them any? I mean, maybe they'll win a 1 or 2, but they're 2-13 on the road. They just lost Steph. You know, they're not winning. They're not going 3-1 the rest of the stretch. Of course, now they probably will. Like they could come back. Like seriously, in 10 days, the Lakers could be ahead of the Warriors, maybe less. And so all these teams are kind of like 10 good days away from being in 3rd or 10 bad days away from being in 12th. And that kind of it actually kind of gives everybody kind of a soft landing no matter what happens. Like the Suns have had like 3 terrible weeks in a row. They're all banged up and injured, but they're like not super duper out of position because of it. But you look at the Grizzlies, like Jaren Jackson. Now he's played 12 games. So I don't want to totally overreact, but it's like the best start to a season he's had. And, you know, last year when he came back from injury, whenever that was a longer recovery. When he came back from injury, he was terrible. He looked terrible for like, I don't remember exactly. I don't want to pin it, but it was like, wow, is Jaren going to be okay? Because, you know, they signed with that extension and they were like, oh my gosh. So this year he comes back from injury and looks great. He's like even better on defense than he was last year when he led the league in blocks. He's shooting the ball better than he ever has. And so you put him onto that team, which was already doing really well. And the other thing is like the Grizzlies continue to draft really, really well. And they continue to draft guys that help them in their rotation. Like Saldi Aldema, like has like really helped them. And David Roddy, like he's played key minutes for them already. And like, you know, I keep thinking about
Zaire's back too, you know, and like when I look at Zaire adapting to his role as a young player, that's pretty rare. Like usually a lot of these younger guys will go the Cam Reddish route where it's like, where are my touches? And Zaire was an on-ball guy, big numbers high school, Stanford, even though I didn't like it. Yeah, like he looked a little low, but it still was like those were his possessions. And then to say to a guy that young, hey, none of these possessions are ever going to be yours. Do all the other shit that isn't cool. And he does it. And even though he's a different player from what I saw from the high school ranks, like that's an amazing credit just to their developmental system and Taylor Jenkins to get some of these guys to buy in that quickly. And you're right, like Roddy was getting real buckets last night.
Yeah. Yeah. They handle their business, the Grizzlies. And so like I look at them and I go, boy, they could make a midseason trade. They've got Danny Green's contract and they've got extra first round picks and stuff. But I'm kind of like, they don't want to trade first round picks because they're so good at using them. By the way, as an aside, like I'm getting ready for NBA Today right now. And I like, we were talking in our production meeting about like what we're going to say on the show. We're obviously going to talk a lot about the Grizzlies, you know, because they kicked the Bucks off the floor. And I was going to talk about this. I was like, well, you know, they got Danny Green's contract and they could easily trade him. And they're like, oh yeah, by the way, Danny's on the show today, like in person here, I think. So I'm like, oh, That should be fun. I'll talk about how they're going to trade him while he's sitting at the table. That should be an interesting segment. Let's do it. But like, the thing about, there's two types of teams. There's teams that are contenders, and then there's teams that are contenders and are upwardly mobile. In other words, they got a guy who's out who will come back, or they got a guy, or they got like great opportunities to make trades. Like Cleveland, for example, is a team I pay a lot of attention to. Like, they're the best non-LeBron team they've had in 20 years. Like, they got a lot going for them. I don't know if they'll get multiple All-Stars, but they should. Like, they're a real interesting team to play, but they're a flawed team, and they're not upwardly mobile. They don't have a guy sitting out who's about to come back. They don't have assets to trade to help them, and they do need help at a couple of spots because they traded everything for Donovan Mitchell. So, like, the Cavs are here, and congrats, they're doing really well. They're having a great season. But you look at a team like the Cavs, you look at a team like the Grizzlies. The Grizzlies are missing arguably their second best player and have all kinds of draft picks and have tradable things that they can do to attach to those picks. And so, like, when I project, I like look at a team, and I feel the same way about the Pelicans, although they're kind of close to luxury tax and they've never paid it. But like, the Pelicans have tradable players and extra draft picks. They're a team, and they've constantly been banged up. I think Brandon Ingram's played half the games, or close to half the games. They're in first or second place, I guess, the Grizzlies, and they're upwardly mobile. So, when I see a team like, Grizzlies and Pelicans, where they are in December, I kind of can get a little excited about what they can be.
Do you like the Pels better than Memphis, or the other way around?
Well, I think Memphis is a little bit further ahead of New Orleans, but New Orleans is, they got more star power. I hope I didn't cause a rumbling in the Grizzlies force there, but Brandon Ingram can carry a team to a playoff game victory. I've seen it. I believe in it. I'm a big believer in him. And they have a very, very deep roster that is all versatile. They can go to a real switch heavy team. They can totally change gears. Memphis's depth, it's obviously there, but it's a little bit more suspect, a little bit younger. Memphis, I think, really could use a trade more than New Orleans. I saw this great quote that Steven Adams said. He was talking about how their team's a little bit crazy. Dylan Brooks is crazy. I'm a little off. Ja's kind of crazy. And he's like, we're not an Apple store. I think he said something like that. We're not an Apple store. In other words, we're not all wearing, polos and tucked into Dockers and all wear glasses and have perfect hair and know how all the actual functionality works. But I was kind of like, yeah, but you know what? You could use an Apple Store manager at times, because
hard to find.
Yeah, because I think it's really awesome that they do that tunnel dance and everything like that, and it totally engages their fans. And Memphis has always been really good about that. Really engaging their fan base. And it's awesome. And Ja plays with reckless abandon and everything like that. But sometimes in the playoffs, you need an Apple Store manager to get in the huddle and say, "Okay, guys, let's calm down. Let's just take it easy." Actually, Danny Green might be that type of guy, although I don't know if he's going to be able to play. He says he's going to, coming back from the ACL, but they could use one more veteran on that team, in my opinion. They may disagree, but I think they could. So, but obviously they're a very exciting team.
A lot of it kind of comes down, like, when I think we're seeing this generation of players where I think the smart people were like, well, why are we letting other guys touch the basketball if they're not as good as the other guy? Let him touch the ball the most. And then it can lead to like an excessive version of it that we've seen with Harden in the past, that we're seeing with Luka now, where I think over the course of a season, you're not necessarily building as many habits, or you're a side guy. It kind of reminds me of some of the Westbrook stuff back in the day, where it's like, so now we're in the playoffs and now you're asking me to bail us out of possessions when for 6 months we just did it this way. Right. And I think it's a real problem. It's a real problem. So it always, it'll be a Trae Young thing that I'll worry about. I saw something from Ja last night that was very minor, may not even mean anything, but it meant something to me, where like Ja normally does. He's killing everybody in the pick and roll. You just don't know what to do with it. Milwaukee had all sorts of problems last night, right? And I think it might have been Brooks. He's on the right side, Ja's on the left. Ja probably had the setup for the matchup, the switch, or however he wanted to do it. And Ja was like, no. I think there's other ball dominant players that it wouldn't even be a concept to them to be like, no, you initiate now. You go do your thing. I like your matchup. I like your spacing better on your side. I think Ja really likes being not only a superstar who can get buckets on everybody, but I think he's a very willing teammate. And in this ball dominant era, I'm not sure that's always easy to find.
Yeah, I think Ja is an absolute treasure. I know it was hardly groundbreaking and being ahead of the curve, but like I saw him play back half of his rookie year, early part of his second year, and I was just like, this guy is an absolute they weren't winning yet. And I remember talking to people in the organization going, congratulations, you guys did it. You have him. And of course, well, we'll see, blah, blah. And they'd say the same today. Well, we'll see. Very quickly, it was clear to me that this is center of a solar system type of guy. And that said, I do think he will go through. I mean, I don't know. I can't predict the future, but I suspect he will go through a couple of playoff runs where he will have to deal with some setbacks and learn how to adapt his game. But he has a mentality that is there. That he is built to be the guy who's holding the trophies at the end. Holding both trophies. I can close my eyes and see him standing on a stage holding the O'Brien Trophy in one hand and the Bill Russell Trophy in the other. I mean, how many guys can you actually seriously look in the eye and say that about? It's a very small number. I can see him doing that. I'm not saying that's happening this year. And I could see it, early in his second season. In fact, I remember going to my bosses, not to put them on the line, but I went to go to my bosses early in his second season, and I really wanted to write up like Ja is the next one. And then he got hurt. He sprained his ankle in Brooklyn, I think, and we didn't do it. But I was 100% convinced of it. And then he came back and he struggled a little bit. My bosses weren't convinced, and it really took ESPN and TNT to see all of last season before they would start to feature the Grizzlies. And I used to beg in production meetings to talk more about Ja and the Grizzlies on TV, and I couldn't sell it. I couldn't sell it. But suffice to say that I'm a real big believer in this guy can do it. I really, really am. And I wrote about this last year. The thing about Memphis is they're a very small market, really a tough NBA market. The folks in Memphis do a great job. It's one of the best run organizations, not only on the basketball side, but on the business side. They do a great job, but there's a lot of headwind there to make that a functioning NBA market. I'm just going to be honest. I'm from Cleveland. I'm really from Akron. I'm not throwing stones. I'm just trying to tell it like it is. But they have an owner who's got a ton of money, and he has spent into the luxury tax before. They quietly in the middle of the grit and grind era, snuck into the top 5 in payroll one year. And there's some teams where you're like, boy, this team's going to run into it. I don't know what's going to happen with the Pelicans. The Pelicans don't have deep pocketed ownership. They have never paid the luxury tax ever in the history of the team, even before the Bensons owned it. How are they going to be able to keep this team together? Are they going to be able to sign all these guys? I don't know. But Memphis, Robert Perez got a ton of money, a ton. He's one of the richest owners in the league. It doesn't always come through, and they don't lavishly spend. I mean, they had that one crazy summer where they spent all that money and signed Chandler Parsons, and it backfired on them. So I think they're going to be a little shy about doing that again. But one of the reasons why I really like Memphis's long-term viability is that they have a front office that knows how to draft and develop. So even when they are good year over year and they're picking in the 20s, you feel like they can get contributors and they can draft people the other teams will want, they can trade. And I think Robert Parra, when it comes time to shove, will go into his pockets and pay. So, if I was Victor Wembanyama and, there's certain teams that I would be worried about getting drafted into. And there's certain teams where, if they were not ideal, like I would never, ever be concerned about, not that Wembanyama is going to go to Memphis, but like when Ja went to Memphis, that was good. That was good. If Wembanyama goes to Charlotte, I don't know, man. I don't know about that. Like if Charlotte wins the lottery, I don't know. I don't know if that's at the place for him, but like I believe in the Grizzlies organization. I think they're headed for really great things. I'm sorry, it's a long rambling answer.
Yeah, but you know what? Good for the Grizzlies. They deserve love. They've been the best team in December. A side note on the Chandler Parsons contract, I ran into him one night out here in the streets of LA, got a round of drinks. I went to throw my card down. He said, I got this. And the toast was to John Hollinger.
I love that Chandler leans into it.
Well, when I threw the card down, he looked at me like, he's like, Russillo, you know how much I just made. And I was like, I do, but I never try to assume. I'm not afraid to throw the card down. And he was like, we're going to put that one back. He's like, I got this. And it was like to John Hollinger. And so, yeah, that is leaning into it. Okay. All right. So I'm with you on this. Like, I love this West right now. I love this league. I love every night. It is so much fun. The talent is absurd. Like the other night, I was just watching a Denver-Portland game, and that's with Porter Jr. out. I was doing Tales from the Couch, and I'm like, okay, you had Grant, you had Hart, you had Simons, you had Lillard, you had Nurkic. On the other side, you've got Murray, you've got Joker, you've got Gordon, you had Bones. I think Brown was probably out there. And I'm like, that's the 10 of like two middling West teams. Like that's a lot of talent out there, at the same time. And I wonder how much that impacts your early wins, reading the wins of the trade market.
So the trade market is thin, I think. And part of the reason is because there's so many teams bunched together and look, you can say whatever you want about the play-in tournament. There's a bunch of teams who would love to be in it. Sacramento would probably have a parade. And I'm not even saying that. But
technically, because I do remember this, it doesnment end your playoff drought if you're in the play-in game and don't win, right? Okay.
Agreed. Okay. But like, tell me that Sacramento is going to be selling if they can make the play-in. Hell no, they're not going to be selling.
They weren't selling before the play-in existed.
Right, I know. I'm just saying, it functionally has made more teams interested. So right off the bat, you have, instead of there being by the time you get to mid to late January, instead of like there being like 6 or 7 teams that know they're done, maybe there's only 3 or 4 in all honesty, that are absolutely outright selling. Number 2, the currency in trades is picks, right? Well, there's just not a lot of teams that have picks to trade. So we know that that Utah has hoovered them up and Oklahoma City has hoovered them up and New York has hoovered them up. And, I guess New Orleans has some. But it's more than just that, because there's a bunch of teams out there that have these encumbered picks. So like Washington, for example, they traded away when they did the John Wall, Russell Westbrook trade, they traded away a pick that may not convey until 2025 because of the protections. So that means you can't trade a pick until 2025 at least. And because you don't know whether it's going to convey in 2020 till 2025, you can't trade 2026. So that means like if you're going to call up Washington and Washington was going to make you an offer, not that I'm saying that they would right now, the first one they're talking about legally is 2027. And by the way, that was reality a year ago too. So, and there's a bunch of teams in that boat. Portland is in that boat. Detroit is in that boat. So not only are there teams that have traded away their drafts, which, there's a handful. But there's all these other teams where they're and Miami to a certain extent is locked up, where their hands are tied. So there's just not a ton of picks floating around out there. Now there are a few teams that are still sort of flush, like Phoenix is flush. They have all their stuff, but I don't know what they can do. They're in an ownership situation. And so there's just not a big supply of players available because teams are giving up, and there's not a lot of currency for when those players are available. So the market in December here is not ripe for trade. I think if you were to survey the GMs now, which I do regularly, not all 30 of them, but I talk to a lot of them on a weekly basis. They don't think that there's going to be a very robust trade market, but that's what they say in mid-December. That doesn't mean that's what it's going to be. But I saw a lot of stories this week talking about the start of trade season. It's a good topic. It's a good time to talk about it. People like to talk about it. I'm not saying there won't be any trades. I just don't think it's going to be a very active one based on my conversation.